Attendance is dropping. People don't think I'm dangerous anymore. I'm so dangerous. All right. I'm not announcing quizzes at the beginning of the lecture because you'll call your significant others to come into class. No way I'm announcing quizzes. All right. Intermediate Microeconomic Theory, lecture N. We're about halfway through already, or getting very close to halfway, right? 1 or 2 lectures away from the halfway point. We're almost done with the setup, right? So we've got 1 or 2 more lectures about costs, then we'll get to market equilibrium, and then we're going to take this model and we're going to let markets fail. There's nothing more beautiful than a failing market to me, and then fixing it. Anybody here seen Zorba the Greek? Or read it? Even better, it's a book, it's got pages. In the end, when the whole thing falls down and he says, I've never seen anything collapse so beautifully before, it's worth watching. The quote was wrong, definitely, but it's that, the saying is preserved. All right, stop babbling, Max, move on. I apologize for cutting my office hours short on Tuesday. If you showed up at 4:35, between 4:35 and 5, I owe you, all right? You can pick what you want, extra office hours or something like that, or an easy final question. I was on the radio, which is something nobody listens to anymore, but I was on it. Last time, what we talked about is we talked about taxation in the short run. We looked at specific taxes, which are dollar taxes per unit of output produced. You can charge those to consumers or producers, and in equilibrium, you'll see the same outcome in our setting here, but we'll talk about that later. The nice thing about a specific tax is it actually shifts curves around. So charging a dollar per unit produced fee shifts around your marginal cost, your average variable cost, and your average total cost. So if you charge $10 per unit, it shifts those 3 curves up by exactly $10. A lump sum tax will not do that, so that's more like a licensing fee. That does not affect marginal cost or average variable cost. It only affects average total cost because it's in some sense like an additional fee added onto your fixed costs. So that's what a lump sum tax does not affect marginal cost or average variable cost, only average total cost. Then we switch to the long run. In the long run, of course, all inputs are variables. You can adjust labor and capital. That means in the long run, you only have variable costs, right? There's no longer this distinction between fixed and variable costs. All variables all costs are variable. That means you have a total variable cost curve and along with it a marginal and an average variable cost curve, right? Those are the only 3 things that exist in the long run. We then derived a concept called an isocost line, which is the set of bundles that of capital and labor that you can afford for a given dollar amount. We then use these isocost lines to figure out how to produce a given level of output at least cost, where we basically took an isoquant of the level of output that we're wanting to produce. We don't know how to get to that number yet, but let's assume we want to produce 100 units. You draw that isoquant and you get on the isocost line that's closest to the origin but still shares 1 point with that isoquant. At that point, right, we showed that the slope of the isocost for Cobb-Douglas isoquants, the slope of the isoquant is exactly equal to the slope of the isocost line, or the marginal rate of technical substitution is equal to the input price ratio, or the additional output you get from a dollar spent on capital is the exact same amount of additional output you would get from a dollar spent on labor, so you have no incentive to switch away from that input combination. We then said, well, that's cool, but what if factor prices change? So we said for a given output level, if one of your factors becomes cheaper, you substitute towards that factor, right? So if the price of labor, wage drops, you substitute for a given output level towards using more labor. That means you're adjusting your input combination, your input mix, and your costs also sync at the same time, right? So that new isocost curve that's tangent to the original isoquant has a different slope, a different tangency, different input mix, and a different label on it. It's a lower cost, all right? That's where we were. Then in the end, I drew a crazy picture that talked about expansion of production. That picture is so important, I'm going to quickly draw it again because it was so much fun and it seemed crazy, right? Any questions before I get going? This button, the microphone sounds really loud. I can hear myself out of all corners. Is that better? You don't care. All right, good. I'm joking. I know you care. All right, so expansion of production. This was this notion of your boss walking in and saying, hey, Max, let's produce 100 units, all right? We're going to produce 100 units, and I want to figure out what's the least cost way of producing 100 units. So if this here is your 100 unit isoquant, the least cost way of producing those 100 units, given a certain input price ratio, let's say that input price ratio is roughly 1 to 1 for now. The least cost way of producing 100 units involves, let's call this L1 units of labor and K1 units of capital. Right, so if you do your startup, you start your firm, you want to produce 100 units, the least cost way of producing 100 units is using L1 units of labor, K1 units of capital, and whatever the total cost of production is simply the label on this isocost, okay? Isocost 1. Could be $100, could be $200, whatever it is. So now your boss walks in and says, great, Max, could we have done any better? And you say, no, boss, I'm a political economy major, or was a political economy major at Berkeley, finest university in the world. You can't do any better than this in the short or in the long run, and that's true, right? You can do whatever you want. We know that this is optimal. Then he says, great. Well, he says, we're going for renewal in second round funding here. We may want to expand production here. So what about doubling output? What's that going to cost us? So you turn around and you say, in the long run, in the short run. He says both, all right? Show me both options. So the first thing you do is you draw the isoquant for 200 units. Ignore this little bit right here, right? That's not there. You didn't see it. It's coming back up. It shouldn't. Actually, I can't live with it. Ooh, hold on. Hold your horses. I think this thing does something that I didn't even know it has. Ooh. No, that erases the whole thing. That's not a smart eraser. Okay, here we go. I thought it had one of those real erasers. Okay, so that's your isoquant for 200 units of production. In the short run, you can't do anything to your capital, right? You're stuck with the amount of capital you have. So if you want to produce more, and economists say when we want to produce more, we don't say produce more because that doesn't sound fancy. We say we want to expand production, right? It just says we want to produce more. So let's expand production in the short run. The only way we can go is by adding more labor. So if I want to expand production in the short run, the only way I can go is over here, right? So in the short run, I can produce 200 units by continuing to use my K1 units of capital and this amount of labor right here. So this is labor in the short run. How much is that going to cost me to produce that much? Well, you just draw the isocost line through that point. Look at the label of that isocost line that goes through that point, and that'll tell you the cost of producing 200 units with K1 units of capital and L1 units of labor. Can we do better in the long run? You got to that film fast. Can we do better in the long run? I told you so last time, so of course we can. Right? Yoga theorem. More flexibility in the long run, you're going to be better off. So let's try and figure out whether that's actually true. So if I got to adjust capital in the long run, and I would choose the minimum the least cost way of producing 200 units, I would just use my isocost line that uses input prices as they're determined by the market, and produce using L long run, LLR, and KLR units of capital. So I'm also going to increase my amount of labor, right, from L1 to LR here, but I'm also going to increase my amount of capital. This is not drawn very nicely. Do I get to try again? I get to try again. Okay, let me tell you why I don't like this picture so you can learn from my mistakes, all right? What was my big deal last time? That it's more expensive to expand production in the short run than in the long run, right? So the iso cost curve that goes through this tangency point here is supposed to be closer to the origin than the big deal iso cost curve that I'm going to draw through the short run cost point. So how did I mess this up? By imprecision. So un-German of me, all right? First, I drew this green dot a little bit to the left here because I can't figure this thing out. And then the tangency, the way I drew it, came out a little bit to the right. So what happens in this picture? The darn iso cost curve goes through the long run optimal bundle and the short run optimal bundle simply because of graphing imprecision. And that can't be, all right? So let me try that again by drawing this precisely. You can totally go, oh, Max, not again. That's okay. All right, here we go. Pen, green. That's the good pen. You can always spot the environmental economists. We wear the green shirts, right? So, and I have a green laser pointer too. So we agree that this is my short run amount of labor. Okay, now I'm going to draw again the cost minimizing way of producing 200 units in the long run. I'm going to be a little bit conservative with my iso cost curve here. Don't fail me now, Microsoft Surface. A little overly conservative here, but that's okay. This is my long run optimal bundle of labor and capital that I will use to produce 200 units if I get to choose both labor and capital. Now we're better off. So this is LLR, this is KLR. So here we can see quite clearly that in the long run I'm using more capital, a little bit less labor than I do in the short run, because in the long run I get to adjust the amount of capital. Why or how can I see that in the long run it's more expensive, less expensive to expand production than in the short run? Well, I can just draw the iso cost curve that goes through my short run bundle if I'm stuck with K1 units of capital. And the iso cost curve that goes through the short run expansion bundle to 200 units is further away from the origin than the iso cost curve that goes through the optimal long run expansion bundle. So you're going to pay more to expand production from 100 to 200 units in the short run than if you were to expand production from 100 to 200 units in the long run, simply because you have more flexibility by the ability to adjust capital. Now, I want to give this a word, okay, a name. So I'm going to talk about something called the expansion path. Right? Sounds very spiritual to me. It's actually the regimen, the diet regimen I'm on. By the time I'm 60, I'm going to weigh 300 pounds, I think. But the point here is the expansion path here is simply the cost-minimizing combination of labor and capital for each level of output. All right? So there's a so-called long-run expansion path, and there's a so-called short-run expansion path. So you start at a certain level of output, and you find the cost-minimizing combination of labor and capital. And then, if you're in the short run, for each level of output, you're trying to find the cost-minimizing combination of labor and capital that allows you to expand production in the short run. Now, in the short run, of course, this is pretty easy because the amount of capital doesn't change. So the expansion path is always a horizontal line, and I'll show that to you graphically. Versus in the long run, if you draw the expansion path, what you do is you draw a bunch of isoquants, all right? And then you simply draw isocost lines tangents to each of your isoquants for a given ratio of input prices and connect those dots on that graph. What are you talking about, Max? I will show you what I'm talking about. Here we go. So the short run expansion path on this particular picture here, let's draw expansion paths in yet another color. Blue is pretty, isn't it? I like it. Cal color. Okay. So if you start here, in the short run, what's the cost-minimizing way of expanding production? You're just going to increase labor. So the expansion path in the short run is simply that green line right here. Right? The only way you can expand production is by moving out on that horizontal line because you're stuck with the amount of capital you have. So the horizontal line of the amount of capital you begin with, that is your short-run expansion path. What's the long-run expansion path? I only know 2 points of it here, and I'll draw you one with multiple points in a second. But the cost-minimizing combination of labor and capital to produce 100 units is this point here. The cost-minimizing combination of labor and capital to produce 200 units in the long run is this point here. So these are two cost-minimizing bundles of labor and capital, input combinations of labor and capital for a given level of output. So the expansion path is made up of all possible, for each level of output, the cost-minimizing combination of labor and capital. So the long-run expansion path, do we have a third color? I'm actually going overboard. How about yellow? That's really good on projectors usually. So the long-run expansion path is going to look something like this. Yeah, you can't see that at all. Actually, you can see that okay because it comes out green on this high-cost projector. So the long-run expansion path looks something like this. What are you talking about, Max? Where did that line come from? Well, in my mind, I'm seeing the following picture, all right? I'll draw it for you in a second. But the only points that I actually know are on my long-run expansion path for a fact are those 2 points right there from this picture. But that doesn't mean for 199, 198, 195, 150, or 1,000 units, I don't know what the cost-minimizing input combination is. I can figure that out. Well, how would you, Max? Where is it? I need some room to draw something. Here we go. We're going off-road, folks. He's drawing axes. This is going to be bad. Labor, capital. So let me draw a bunch of isoquants that are all downward sloping, even though these seem to be coming up a little bit in the end. And let me draw the cost-minimizing input combination on each of these isoquants for a given input price ratio. So I'm shifting isocost lines out parallel. So on each of these isoquants here, I have a cost-minimizing combination of labor and capital. These are tangency points, right? Where this isocost curve line here could be for $100, $150, $200, $250, $300, or whatever labels you want. They just increase in value as you get further away from the origin. The isoquants start at, let's say, 50, 100, 150, 200, 250. So for each quantity, I know what the cost minimizing input bundle is. So if I connect all of these dots, the connection of all of these dots for all possible quantities, and I just drew a couple here, that's your long-run expansion path, all right? So the long-run expansion path is simply connecting the dots. So that's the long-run expansion path right here. Does it have to be a straight line? Not at all, right? Depends on what your production technology looks like. The only technology where it's always a straight line is a Leontief process, right? Because you'll always use inputs in fixed proportion, so you'll always use the same combination. So the cost minimizing input bundle is always the one at the corner, and those corners lie on a straight line. But for regular processes, there's no reason to believe that the long-run expansion path is necessarily a straight line. Okay. We're going to start drawing some pretty crazy pictures today. Today turns out to be a pretty hard lecture. Maybe it isn't for you, but it is for me. So this picture right here, even though it's just a sketch, contains a ton of information. I would put adjectives in front of that ton, but I can't because I'm being taped, right? Actually, it'd be a noun, not an adjective, but whatever. The point here is, what do we know, right? The labels on the isocost curves tell me how much I'm spending to produce this much output, right? So I know for each level of output right here how much I'm spending to produce that output. What graph do you think plots how much money you're spending against the total level of output? I heard it. Say it loud. Say it proud. The cost curve, right? So a long-run cost curve plots total cost of production against output. So this picture actually gives you all the information you need to plot total cost. You just look at the label of the isocost curve against however much output you're producing here. You just look at the label of the isoquant. While that's not a convenient thing and that would confuse any producer of anything ever if you drew them a picture like this, but you as the trained economist now have an understanding of, well, this picture actually provides me with much more information than even the simple cost curve. In addition to cost and output, right? Cost minimizing cost for each level of output. What else do you know from this picture? Because the cost curve just gives you cost against output. Do you know something about the ratio of inputs used? The answer's got to be yes. All right. So you know that for this much output right here, you're paying this much, and you're using this many units of labor and this much capital. For this level of output here on the black isoquant, you're paying this many dollars and you're using this many units of labor and this many units of capital. So this picture right here tells you everything you need to know about a firm, really. It's an incredibly powerful picture that has a lot of information in it that you can then use and dumb down for whoever you're trying to explain this stuff to by collapsing it into fewer dimensions, by example, by plotting a total cost curve and a marginal and an average variable cost curve. But this here contains all the information you need about production, and it looks pretty. And it has cool names in it. Isocosts, isoquants, input ratios, input price ratios. It's pretty cool. You're starting to acquire some serious econ language terms. Okay. Now, Max, cost curves. Talk to me. Okay, I will. I talk to myself a lot. You never want to sit next to me on an airplane. Because I don't talk to you. That's really annoying, but if the person next to you is talking to themselves, that's just scary. So reasons for U-shaped cost curves. In the short run, right, we drew pictures that we can draw in our sleep now. So we had Q, we had dollars, right? We had an average variable cost curve that was U-shaped. We had an average total cost curve that was U-shaped, and a marginal cost curve that cut through the minimum of both. These are all U-shaped. You, and you. Why are these U-shaped in the short run? Well, I'm not going to pay you for that because it says so right here, right? So the reason the cost curves are U-shaped in the short run, especially the average cost curve right here, average total cost, average cost initially decreases really rapidly because this difference right here, you're spreading fixed costs over more and more units. So average fixed cost drops off really quickly in the beginning, which drops off average total costs pretty quickly. The other reason we get U-shaped curves here is that marginal costs start increasing, right? Sequentially, as time goes on and we produce more and more output here, my marginal costs start increasing. So we're going to come up with a relationship today that's going to totally make your day. Actually, it'll make you very worried, but it's really powerful. So I'm offering, how about, oh no, it says here. Yeah, another profit-making opportunity missed by the students in IAS 106. The average cost increases because the diminishing marginal product of labor. So as you hire more and more workers in the short run, each additional worker eventually adds less and less additional output. That means in order to produce one more unit of output, you're going to have to hire more and more marginal labor, all of whom are paid W dollars per hour. So as you add more and more labor, each additional worker gives you less output. If you want to produce more output, you're going to have to hire more labor, so your average costs go up because of diminishing marginal product. All right? That's in the short run. Well, Max, that's kind of cool. I get that, sort of. But in the long run, it would be nice if we had cost curves that look like they do in the long run, right? I sort of wish that you're going to show me something like this. Ooh, bad. Let's try that again. I was hoping you were going to show me something like this, that there's some sort of long-run cost curve that has output here, total cost in the long run here, and it sort of looks like our total cost in the short run, right? We don't have any fixed costs, so there's just a total variable cost curve, but this is what our total cost curves look like in the short run, which would lead me to believe that probably my average cost curves, thinking about the shoelace trick, would look something like this, right? An average cost curve with a marginal cost curve that looks something like this. Right, so in the long run, if this is total cost, where total cost is equal to total variable cost, if my total variable cost curve or total cost curve looks like my total cost curve